There's been so much talk lately about imposter syndrome, how it affects your life in a negative way, how it affects your work and your career progression. And as a person who potentially feels like she's battling it quite a lot in her career, I want to talk a little bit about how you recognize imposter syndrome, how you distinguish it from just feeling a little bit anxious and unsure on your skills and just feeling a little bit more like a junior person who still has a lot to learn, and how I use 5 very actionable tips on battling imposter syndrome in my work and in my career. So first of all, I wanted to talk about an important distinction between imposter syndrome and just like this feeling of being new and fresh and junior and not knowing a little too much about the field that you're working in. Feeling like you don't know something and being willing to learn and feeling like there's always something more that you can learn from someone who's more senior is a really good skill to have. It's a really good state to be in because you get to kind of learn everything from a very fresh perspective, and it shouldn't be confused with imposter syndrome, which is a much more stressful place to be in. It's much more serious problem when you have an imposter syndrome. If you're just feeling like you're unsure and you still have a lot to learn, be happy, that's not imposter syndrome. There are a few signs that you have imposter syndrome. One, for example, is that you can't take feedback, you can't take positive feedback, you don't trust compliments that you get. You always expect that someone is just saying that for no good reason, but there's actually a lot more negative feedback that you can get. The second one is something that I'm really feeling a lot on a personal level, is that you got very lucky, and that's why you're where you're at right now. So you get, for example, lucky that you got into this university, or because you landed this job, and without luck you wouldn't have gotten it. There's potentially some truth to that because we're all ending up in the right moment, in the right place, in the right time. But if you always feel like, oh, like, why was I hired here? This was just potentially lucky, then that's a sign of imposter syndrome. The next one is that you always expect things to fail, you always expect things to go wrong in the projects you're running or things that you're doing at work. You always know what can go wrong, and you always have this kind of negative feeling that, ooh, like, yeah, I mean, it's going well right now, but I know something can go wrong any second. And the next sign that I want to mention is that you can't take mistakes very easily. I went from a stage where I really feel bad about everything that I failed in, that everything that didn't go well, everything that didn't go as to my expectations, even though those could be really negative as we just talked. And I'm just trying to extract as much experience from it, learn from it, and go forward with this experience rather than feeling like a failure. So if you notice yourself in those patterns of behavior, there is a chance that you might have imposter syndrome, and it's important to recognize and important to work on, not only because it makes you feel shitty about yourself, but also because it actually affects how you behave in your life, and it can affect your career progression, your salary, your recognition at work. Recently, I read a book by Susan David, which is called Emotional Agility, where she talks about imposter syndrome, and she talks about coherence for bad decisions when you have imposter syndrome. People who think poorly of themselves prefer interacting with individuals who also view them negatively. So people with low self-esteem or people who have imposter syndrome tend to quit their jobs more often when their earnings increase over time. In their minds, it just doesn't seem coherent to be appreciated and rewarded. This is literal self-sabotage, and it's not a good option for anyone. It's clearly something that I think nobody would want in their life when they're feeling like a fraud if they get a raise or if they get a promotion. So it's important to work on dealing with imposter syndrome, because it's not only how you feel right now, but it also affects what you're doing in your life and in your career. Over time, I worked out 5 different tips and 5 different things you can do to battle imposter syndrome. Some of them are requiring a little bit more effort, some of them are really basic. So the first one that I'm doing a lot is keeping my CV up to date. I'm actually going a little bit beyond that, and I'm writing down in the spreadsheet all the projects that I've been working on, all the skills that I used in these projects, who I collaborated with, what kind of output did this project give and what kind of value it brought to the whole company. I have a video on how I'm doing that. I will link it in the corner here, and it's a little bit more detail on what kind of structure am I using for that. Having your CV up to date and being able to say what you've been working on and what kind of value you brought is not only really good for finding another job or meeting new people, but also really helps you to measure your accomplishments, celebrate them, and be able to say like, oh, like I did so many cool things and they were successful. I must not be an imposter or a fraud. Tip number 2 is doing networking. Talking to different people, a little bit in your area of responsibility and in your field, some of them maybe not in your field. It's really important not only to practice your elevator pitch of like the project you worked on and the skills you have and what's your role, but also to just find out what other people are doing. If I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable or too shy to talk too much about myself, I'm just starting to ask a lot of questions, what everyone else is working on, what everyone else is doing. Here, of course, it's very important to be able to distinguish when people do a little bit of self-praise or overselling their accomplishments with actually genuinely sharing their skills, their responsibilities, and the outcome of their projects. It does come with time, so the more you network, the easier you will be able to see the difference between people who oversell themselves and people who are actually very genuine and honest and humble about what they're working on. And personally, I get a lot of value from networking on conferences, not only because I see that people are curious about what I'm doing and are really genuinely interested about the work that the project that I'm working on, but also because I can see that everyone has very similar struggles, everyone has very similar problems. You can talk a little bit of that, of course, following your NDAs at work without revealing too much information. Just kind of get the sense that everyone is sort of in the same boat, everyone has the same problems, and everyone can a little bit support each other in the path forward to solving those problems. Another really nice thing from networking is that you get to meet a lot of junior people that may be on the stages before your career progression stage, so you get to help them out and help them to get where you are right now, and also get some validation from them feeling like you are their mentor. Tip number 3 that I've been recently doing quite a bit is joining masterminds or communities of interest. Mastermind is a group of people, usually very small one, which supports each other in reaching specific goals. It can be something very specific, applicable only to your role or your career. It can be something that's more of like a support group where people have very different goals and they kind of try to have this pep talk and talk about their issues, support each other, telling each other that everything will go well. So I think that's a really nice community to be in. It's also a really good opportunity to get to know people from various backgrounds, from various places. I actually do recommend on joining masterminds online a little bit more because it gives you a little bit more of anonymity, so you might not encounter someone who you're working with or maybe potentially will be working with in the future if you're joining a community with people from all over the world, and you get to know, well, people from various backgrounds and various places, so that's also a really nice benefit of that. Now, the tip number 4 is adopting a pet project, and that's somewhat related to your skills but goes a little bit beyond that. For example, if you're a software developer who works on a very gigantic application for some big corporation in their 9-to-5 job, maybe you want to learn a new programming language, maybe you want to learn HTML or React and build a little landing page for your sisters, brothers, aunts, flower shop that can give them a little bit more clients. The goal here is to do something from the beginning to an end, which can be scoped, which can bring actual value to you or someone else you know, and which can expand on your skills, but not necessarily have this pressure of need to deliver something outstanding, something that works very well right away. And the tip number 5 is a little bit more on going out of your comfort zone side and a little bit more for the brave ones out there, and it is public speaking. I think public speaking brought me the most value when it comes to not feeling as much of an imposter, because first of all, I learn a lot when I prepare for the presentations. You know, there's a saying that if you want to learn something the most detailed and best way, the best way to do that is to teach someone that thing. So here, when I'm preparing presentation, I want to be able to give answers to all those meticulous questions someone can have at the end of it. So I'm kind of over preparing, learning a little bit more in detail about the field I'm talking about. Another value you can get out of public speaking is that it's actually making your networking much easier. If you're feeling shy to come out to this group of people and start talking to them about some topic, to meet them, you can just do a talk and then they will come towards you and ask you a lot of questions. I actually use this one quite a lot on like women in data science conferences where I've been talking about A/B testing, and then people would come over to me and ask me a lot of questions of how it happens. So I kind of skip this awkward stage where I need to reach out first. When it comes to public speaking, you have to be comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable with receiving potential criticism, potential negative feedback, or just weird feedback. So I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. Definitely not if you're at the very beginning of you're dealing with imposter syndrome. So this is a little bit more on the extra side, but I think that works quite well. You get the recognition, you get the confirmation and validation of the job you're done, and also the extra benefit of not having to do as much networking as you would have to do if you wouldn't do a public talk. So I hope this was useful. Maybe one of those tips or a combination of some of the tips can really help you to feel a little bit less of an imposter if you're trying and attempt that. I recommend everyone starting with tip number 1, which is keeping your CV and project list up to date. I think that's the most basic and the most useful one. You will feel much better about yourself when you write down all those gigantic list of projects that you had accomplished very well at your work. Then you can do more networking, you can join mastermind groups, you can do your own pet projects that expand the set of skills that you're having and make you feel more comfortable with various skills that you're applying at work. And as an extra thing, if you can do a public talk and if you're feeling comfortable-ish on stage, then I totally recommend doing that as well. It really gives you a lot of validation and this positive energy from a crowd of people when you're sharing your experience with them. Let me know in the comments if you try one or many of those tips, and thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel and have a nice day.